evening and welcome to the first Saturday of the 40th Mill Valley Film Festival. Woo! I'm Zoe Elton and I'm Director of Programming for the Film Festival, and it's really so great to see you all here for MUDBOUND tonight. Thank you for coming. And thank you for your patience as we've tried to squeeze every last person into pretty much every last seat in this house. Are you all sitting comfortably? Okay, good. Then let's get this show going. We have an initiative at the festival called Mind the Gap. It's about women and film and tech. We've just had an amazing day over at the Outdoor Art Club, and some of the MUDBOUND team were a part of that. It's also something that has helped us sort of elevate the conversation about women and film and gender parity and a lot of other issues in filmmaking. And what we've been finding is that there have been a lot of people in our communities who are also very passionate about this. One of them is our sponsor for tonight, Andalou Naturals, and I wanted to thank them for sponsoring this and for sponsoring Mind the Gap and for being a part of our community. Thank you, Stacey. Thank you, Andalou Naturals. And tonight's film, MUDBOUND, is a special evening for us. We're doing a spotlight on Dee Rees, who is really one of the most stunning talents in American cinema working right now. So I'm thrilled that we get to not only see this extraordinary film, but also to celebrate the work that she's doing. And I'd like to introduce Dee to you. Dee Rees. Welcome back to Mill Valley Film Festival. Last time you were here with Pariah. I'm so glad you've come back with MUDBOUND.
Yeah, me too. It's kind of funny because Mill Valley is 40. I turned 40 this year, so we're all 40 together. It's kind of great, yeah? Yeah, so I mean, I know this is supposed to be a spotlight on me, but honestly, what I'm most interested in putting a spotlight on is all the amazing artists who helped me make this film who are here with us tonight. Rachel Morrison, my cinematographer, come up, please. Tamar Kali, our film composer. Mako Kamitsuna, the film's editor. And Angie Wells, our makeup department, head of makeup. So we made this film, guys. So just keep that in mind as you see it. And that's all I got to say, really. Yeah.
Hey. Welcome to you all. We'll be talking with Dee following the screening. And I wish you a thank you all for such extraordinary work on so many levels. And all I'm going to say is enjoy the film, and we'll be back later. Thank you.
Thanks.
It's my great honor to invite Erica Huggins, a human rights activist, poet, educator, and friend, to give the Mill Valley Film Festival Award to Dee Rees. Erica Huggins.
Well, first I want to just breathe. So, good evening. And I'm really very honored to present the Mill Valley Film Festival Award to Dee Rees. I knew I would feel honored before I saw the film. And now I am so honored and so humbled by her work. Spotlights. Well, she continues to shine light on the places in our past, our present, so that our future for little girls and boys would be different. for the generations now and the generations to come. Some years ago, I went to the screening of a short film called Pariah. It was yet to be a feature. And the beauty of the film was that the main characters, the one main character, was so at home in her womanness, her blackness, her queerness. And today we just saw a film where our main character, one of them, was so at home in his body, because both in Pariah and in MUDBOUND, they did not lose their spirit. Where is the spirit of our country? Look at its history. We didn't come to be entertained tonight, and if we did, we came to the wrong theater. Dee is a brave voice, a clear voice, one that unabashedly shows us the nature of our coinciding identities, and we all have intersecting identities. I could say so many things, but you can say them to yourselves. Just breathe and allow yourselves to be with the truth of the art that you just witnessed from an unbound spirit. That is Dee Rees. So I'm grateful. Because you know, some of us only woke up on November 9th, 2016. But for generations, for centuries, there are some of us that have been fully awake. And so thank you, Dee, for being a very loud alarm clock in our lives, so that all of us awake together can work together to rid ourselves of the darkness that you so shine a light on. I'm encouraged by you. I'm encouraged by Pariah, by Bessie, by MUDBOUND. I'm encouraged by the dreams you haven't yet brought into realization. I'm encouraged because you, like many young women of color voices, are a role model for young artists who may not even be born yet. Thank you for shining a light on our hearts by opening our minds and by being brave enough to tell us the truth. I'd like to welcome you forward, Dee, to receive the Mill Valley Film Festival Award.
I didn't know until, oh my God.
I just love you.
I love you too. Thank you. You're gonna make me cry.
Well, it's okay to cry, isn't it? Uh-huh. And you give me hope that I will be able to laugh as well. You give me hope. You give us hope.
Thank you. I just have to respond. I'm sorry. You're like one of my heroines, and so I didn't even know that you were going to be here tonight, much less presenting me an award. And I was like shaken up just seeing her outside the panel. And I mean, I first met Erica, I believe it was like 6 years ago. It was like around Pariah. And you guys just came up to me after a screening and were like, hi, I'm Erica. So I just felt like, oh my, I'm in the presence of giants. And I just really can't thank you enough for giving me a language, for giving me a foundation, for laying the groundwork to be proud, for laying the groundwork to be militant, for laying the groundwork to say what's really happening. I mean, you guys paved the way, so thank you. Thank you.
Sometimes it's hard to talk about a film after just seeing it, but I mean, your film leaves me breathless. And I think that what Erica has spoken to so eloquently, makes me want to ask you about storytelling and coming to telling a story of this kind and the importance of doing this, a period piece. I mean, a piece that takes place, at a very particular time in American history and in history. And how you see the importance of film storytelling now, for us now. Broad question, I know.
Yeah, so for me, I mean, I think art always comments on the time in which it was made. So this happens to be 1940s, but whether it was set in 2040s, it would still be commenting on, 2016 when we shot it.
Yeah.
And so, when the first version of the script came to me, it was by a writer named Virgil Williams. It's back in 2015. And so I read it, and I thought there's a lot of there. But I needed more, so that prompted me to go back and read Hillary Jordan's novel and see what else could be there. And I was struck by kind of the inner monologues more so, but still, for me to want to do this, like it had to be a story about two families and not a story about one family. And so the Jackson family had to have agency. They had to have, they didn't just come with the house. They needed to have their own kind of fears, desires, drives. And so like when I took this on, I took it on because it was a chance to interrogate my own personal history. My grandmother has stories of how her mother, her parents picked cotton, and she swore she was never going to pick cotton. She wanted to be a stenographer. And so that's why I made the little girl in the film want to be a stenographer. And then, and she would tell me stories about she and her little brother would be riding on her mother's cotton sack, through the fields. And so that inspired that shot. And so for me, I think as a filmmaker, you kind of have to take something that maybe isn't what you want it to be and figure out a way to tell the story that you want to tell, in this kind of sneaky way in a way and kind of make it be about what you want to be about. So MUDBOUND, I always saw this dark symbiosis and these two families. They're mired together and they're mired in the mud. You have the two sons who are united by the sense of trauma. You have the two husbands who both are tied by the sense of disinheritance. Hap, whose bones are in the ground, his blood is in the ground, his sweat is in the ground, his ancestors are there, who can never own this land. And then Henry, who feels like Pappy has sold away his birthright, feels entitled, and he's able to buy his way there, but he feels disinherited. And with the two women, with Florence and Laura, I wanted to explore this sense of economic disempowerment. Their husbands are telling them how things are and how things should be, but both women are disobeying, kind of going behind their backs to kind of do what they think is best for the family. So, for me, this film was about not being able to go back home. It's about what it means when family is the thing that kind of weights you down, and it's how, in a way, our we are connected to our histories. It's not these separate moments. And for me, even the burial, is bigger. And for me, the burial was symbolizing, we can either choose to kind of bury our history and forget about it, pretend it didn't happen, or we can kind of bury ways of being, ways of thinking. And so even with the two men, with Henry and Jamie, Henry's trying to bury history. Pappy's representative of a way of thinking, and Henry wants to suppress it, pretend like it doesn't happen. That's why he needs this moment to be, smooth. And whereas Jamie, he's going to walk away from that grave burying an attitude. Not saying he's going to be perfect, but he'll be a little bit better than Henry was. And Henry is maybe a little bit better than Pappy was. And so I just look for ways to kind of weave those kind of things into the film and work conceptually. I'm exploring whiteness as currency. So all the McCallans have it. It's not just Pappy is a crazy old bigot in a corner. It's just about how they spend it. So Pappy flaunts his currency. Henry spends his firmly. He believes the system's fair or else it wouldn't be. And Laura kind of barters with hers. She still makes makes Florence kind of do her bidding even when it's not safe for Florence. And then Jamie tries to burn his currencies, tries to pretend he doesn't have it, which is equally dangerous because this endangers Ronzel. And so like by being oblivious to your inheritance, by being oblivious to what you have, you're actually doing more damage. You're actually endangering those around you because you're not considering them. So I just wanted to explore all those things in this film and make it be about all those things.
Yeah. Yeah. You said at the beginning, in reading the story, that you were looking at the internal voices, and one of the things that really struck me when I first saw the film was that was your use of voiceover. I say voiceover, but I would prefer to say it like internal monologue, and it's rare that I've seen anyone use it with such a fluidity, and that it's such a beautiful way of, it's almost like sort of like the waves that bring us that introduce us to each character. And I think there's something about having to listen that also brings us inside when we experience that. So could you talk a little bit about that? Because sometimes it's like voiceover can be not so good.
Sure, it's a risk. So I think so. A lot of the voiceover came from the novel, and I wrote original monologues for Hap and for Florence and for Ronzel. But I think voiceover, is tricky when it's like explaining to you something that you're already seeing. I think it's most effective when like it's saying something that's like not happening or saying something that someone would like never say. I think that sometimes like the things we say to ourselves, in some ways can be obstacles or can be like limiting versus like the things we say to others. And so with these characters, I just wanted each character to sound different, and each character, I wanted to have a very like lyrical kind of fluid feeling where the characters link thematically. And in that, I have to credit editor Mako Kamitsuna, because in the edit, the voiceovers, we had to really figure out how to hand off, And so in terms of our approach, we edited just the Jackson family as if it had to be its own movie and stand on its own. And then we edited just the McCallum family as if it had to be its own movie and stand on its own. And we kind of let those intersecting points kind of fall together. And like when we knew each scene was working, it was almost an exercise in like, how much voiceover like we didn't need, and so there's so much that we cut and pulled back because it's already happening in a look or in a feeling. And with the camera language, with Rachel Morrison, like all the way up the big wides, when we're with each character, it's very subjective, the camera language. So it's like when you're with Hap, you see the field as Hap sees it, which is like futility, which is futility. And when you're with Henry, you see the field as Henry sees it. You see it as commerce. You see it as hope. And so by using the camera in that way, with the camera already placing us with the character, and like unapologetically, we're seeing the landscape even differently. The voiceover then kind of heightens it and feels honest, and it doesn't feel like it's like coming from like beyond the screen, like explaining stuff to the audience. Because I think like the audience is smart. You guys get it. And so the voiceover should communicate like almost like a mood, like a spirit of the world, and something that you wouldn't get from just what characters say. And then that's what gives you contradictions, when we know what the character like really feels, and we hear them say something completely different in dialogue. So I just like to and so like with like Hap, for example, I wrote the monologue like, what good is a deed? Because I wanted to do the whole play on words between deed and deeds, and to really explore, this idea of like investment. And so the fact that this man has invested over time, has been there, but he'll never be vested in this place. And with Mary and Florence, when she's talking about, I remember my mother blue, that cognitive dissonance she has about going to care for another woman's children, where she's doing exactly the thing she said she would never do. And so that truck ride then means something different for her, to go to a house where she's not even wanted. So I just think it's just, it was a part of the book, and like it was part of the draw of it for me, because it allowed me to get inside these characters, and it allowed me a way to make the characters, all of the characters, more, fleshed out.
It sounds like a part of that you must have discovered in post-production, perhaps rather than in pre-production, or even on the set. And the way you describe it sounds to me as though, it sounds like music. It sounds as though that you're working like a composer, and that the instruments that you're using include language and sound and actors and light and cinematography and music, and that there's something in the overall composition of that sounds like it must have come together a lot in the in the editing process.
Well, yeah, it did. So as Mako and I were cutting, like I said, like some of the voiceover we like killed because it was too like on the nose, like you're saying what's already happening. So I wrote new voiceovers. Like it can't be just talking about his mule. We see him with the mule, you know. So then like what else does he say? And so it was like you kind of see like where something's missing or where you want more. And so I like wrote more. And for yeah, so I would say we definitely found it in the edit, and like there are many things that we took out, and like less is more in ways.
Yeah.
And I lost my train of thought. I was gonna say one more thing about it, but yeah, I would think that the music, the musicality of the language mattered to me, And when we cut, I think initially we didn't have like a ton of temp score. I think we used like "There Will Be Blood" as temp score to get like a feeling of the world, like that was kind of like the reference, and we had all this like C.J. Johnson stuff. But in a cut, we were like really focused on making sure like that it worked without help, and not using music as a crutch, and then just really giving Tamar like a blank canvas so she could come in and paint. And so she scored moments where I wasn't imagining score, and then she didn't score moments when, so Tamar totally came in and had, we screened the film for her, and it was just really just letting her have it, and like where she imagined things, like where she thought things could go. So it all starts to tie together, and like the picture then like drives, like, the cinematography informs kind of like the voices in a way, so as you're saying, and like it feeds the music. So like when there's blank spaces, like when you want to feel something, it kind of, once you have that edit, like once you like are able to lock the cut, to me that's when you're really able to see, like you're really able to fill in, and you're always worried about doing too much, and exercise restraint in terms of like how you're using like all the tools to like to shape the characters. And Tamar can talk about it more, but I think she like wrote themes that were particular to the characters, so that Henry has a sound, there's a sound of coming home, there's a sound of the mud itself. So it's very deliberately and kind of thoughtfully done. It's not just schlacking music on top, schlacking talking on top. Like we tried to have as little as possible.
Yeah. Mary J. Blige is a revelation in this film. So could you talk a little bit about casting her or working with her and how that came about?
Yeah, Mary's amazing. I know I wanted to work with her for Florence. I imagine Florence's character as having a very kind of like reserved exterior, but a very vulnerable interior. And so I needed an actress that could have that duality. And Mary also has this like teardrop shaped scar, and so I wanted to have that perpetual tear. And so, was hoping that she would do it. And with Florence, Mary like completely was willing to strip down, no makeup, no hair, no glam. And that was huge for me, because a lot of times like huge actresses won't, let themselves be seen. And so just being seen is like such a scary thing, such a hard thing, like for the characters themselves and for the actors. And so the fact that Mary was willing to strip down and be seen, was important. And there was another actor on set with her who didn't realize that it was her. Like one of the kids playing her son was sitting 2 feet away, and he's talking and talking. And when I'm on set, I mistakenly called her Mary, because when I'm on set, I try to call them only the character's name. And the kid had a fan moment. He's like, "Oh my God, you're Mary J. Blige? Wait, no, you're Mary J. Blige." And we'd been shooting all morning, and he just realized it was her, which is like a testament to her character. Because in all the actors, like no one was leaving and going to trailers. No one was like, stepping out of it. You can go get water. You can like, there's many ways, on a set, especially with a shoot as tough as this, that you can kind of step out of the moment. But Mary stayed on set. All the actors like stayed on set. So we're in these like small. We shot in actual sharecroppers' cabins, and they stayed in the moment. And it was the point I was going to say about ADR is I recorded most of them on the set, like while they're still in costume, while you're still in the moment, while you're still looking at the room, because I think it changes like the quality of the performance, versus doing ADR 6 months later in a cold room, and you're not remembering the mood you're in. So, with sound, you try to get it clean. And so, but I wanted to record it on set, even if it was dirty. And we used a lot of that. And so in ADR, we only did like very small bits, but it was important that the actors, to be in the state of mind, like to do the voiceover for a scene on set immediately after the scene, so that they could stay in that kind of zone. And yeah.
So when you're dealing with such intense material with a group of actors, and you're dealing with it, on a set that's very, close to the bone, so to speak, how do you find that balance between taking people to the emotional place that they have to be in to do this kind of work, which is very vulnerable, and taking care of people? I mean, or do you feel that you have to do that? Or, I mean, obviously you're working with a great group of actors here, so they can, they probably have their ways of dealing with that. But it seems like you must be It must be very raw at the end of of a shooting day.
Yeah, so my process, I feel like I do like a lot of the work in prep, and so my rehearsal process is untraditional. Like, I'm not beating the lines. I expect the actors to come prepared to know the lines, and what I work on in rehearsal is just the relationships. So I would bring in like Ronzel and I bring in Florence and just have them stare at each other, just look at each other for 60 seconds and do a repetition. And so their repetition was, Florence, Mary would say, "You're making a mistake," and Jason would say, "No, no, I'm not. I know what I'm doing. You're making a mistake. No, I'm not." And so just have that mother-son like repetition back and forth. And then for Henry and Hap, like in this film, like I needed the language to move quickly, like it couldn't have a contemporary hitch in it, and so nigger had to be a noun. It had to be like cow, truck, dog, nigger, tree. Like there couldn't be a stutter, in either like in either the saying of it or the receiving of it, to really place in the time. So one of the things I did with Jason Clarke and Rob Morgan, who plays Hap, I had them face off with each other and over again had Henry say, "You're a good nigger," and have Hap say, "Thank you, sir. You're a good nigger. Thank you, sir," over and over and over again. And you could see like, Jason like, uncomfortable saying it, and you could see Rob like angry and swelling, but they had to take it and swallow it. And so after like just doing that over and over again, it's like that's set. If you can just like hold somebody's eye contact, if you can like do this, I go straight for the discomfort, you can do this thing. Once we get on set, we're just blocking it. We're just getting, options. We're just choreographing it. Yeah. And the same thing like with the two women. So like I had Mary and Carrie just pair up, and their core for me was like about power. And so I had them giving back to each other, "You have the power," "No, you have the power," and so over and over again. So they have this intimacy, and in terms of on-set, I just like to work very like one-on-one. Like I'm not in a village somewhere a mile off shouting through a bullhorn. Like I'm on set with a handheld monitor, and like I'm on an Apple box, and so we're all literally in the same room. So whatever the frame is, I'm like 3 feet outside the frame, and we're all in it together. So there's never this feeling of distance. And as we're making adjustments, like, if I'm giving an adjustment to Hap, Henry doesn't need to hear that. If I'm giving an adjustment to Florence, Laura doesn't need to hear that, so no actor feels put on the spot. And in that way, I'm also able to allow them to surprise each other, have them say things that maybe aren't planned, so the other actors just have to respond to it. And it just keeps it alive and fresh, and it keeps the actors listening. And just with an ensemble like this, like it requires a lot of generosity from the cast, because they have to really, they're not just managing one relationship arc, they're managing many. Like this film could have been just about two brothers, that could have been 2 hours in itself. Or this film could have been just about a marriage, and that would have been 2 hours. Or this film could have just been about 2 soldiers coming home. But this film had to be all those things, and that required a lot of patience from the actors and a lot of management as they're, knowing where they are in time with each relationship, and like just keeping that kind of core strong. So that's why I go straight for the core. And like with the 2 soldiers, it couldn't be like schmaltzy, sentimental, like we're not going to believe these guys are best buds. So just building that, like in the first scene, like don't look at each other, like when you talk to each other, just like don't look at each other. And then slowly there's sidelong glances, so you're literally seeing each other. And then when they go to the barn, like I start them wide, then Ronzel comes closer. Then the next scene they're side by side, and we shoot a bunch of French over. So now it's intimate, So there's ways you use the blocking to kind of build, the arcs and the relationships in ways that, feel honest.
Yeah. Let's open to questions from the audience. Would you like to bring up your...
Yes, I want to bring up the crew for the Q&A, because you might have questions for Rachel, DP, Tamar, composer, Mako, editor, Angie, makeup.
Let's move these off. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. That's great. Thank you. Why don't I stand at the end, and then I'll have you guys all down here. There we go. That's great. So we'd like to take some questions. Oh, hold on. Give you, let me pass that one on down.
Well, I'll just pass this one.
There we go. We'll share. I got another.
No, you got it.
There's another one here.
Okay.
Okay, we're good. Thank you. Yeah, questions.
I see a hand right there.
Okay.
No, you sir, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit more about the sources of the script? You mentioned an original script and a novel. And I thought I detected that it was a little bit more about the White family, and then you transformed it. So could you talk about that process?
Yeah, so the original source material is a novel by Hilary Jordan called Mudbound. And Virgil Williams, a very talented writer, wrote the first draft of the script, and that's what I initially read. And then I wanted to make the script more about both families. So the first script, as in the book, the bond is over music, and Laura plays the piano, and the little black girl can sing, but that just, wasn't interesting for me. And so I just wanted to make it more about these two families and their struggle over the same patch of land. So, and even like Ronzel when he's leaving for war, it was important, like that's a scene that's not in the book, but it was important to contextualize that Ronzel's not just a son of Hap and Florence, he's a son of the community. So that's why it matters so much when he goes away. Like that's the expectation that's riding on him, and that's why they cling to him, when he comes back. So for me, it was just about deepening it and like adding on what was already there, and I think it's just made it more, interesting for the actors and just for the narrative.
Go ahead. You
I'll let
can call it. Okay.
The guy in the back.
Yep. Okay. Yep.
Brilliant film, it's so powerful, so layered that I was just at the edge of my seat the entire movie because you just expected it to explode and you want to really want those sweet moments happening between people. Did you do an immersive process with your cast as well in terms of the sort of historical context and getting the outside of what the South, the Jim Crow South was? And still thought into what, and how did you bring that into your consciousness of all of that?
Did you hear the question? Yeah. Okay. It was a comment about how, well, let's see if I can make it into a brief question. So how did you work with your actors to contextualize the historical part of what you were working with?
So, we had a lot of like photographs, and so as a director, like I'm never out to give the cast a history lesson. I'm assuming you're gonna like prepare, but if there's certain details I want them to pay attention to, I draw that. So like my grandmother had done a diary about like what a typical day on the farm was, and there were pictures, and there were like, there's little like inventories of like what would be in a sharecropper's cabin. There were like diagrams of the cabin. So I just kind of share with them, like I try to start with what's personal. And so I tried to share with them the things that were personal for me and invited them to interrogate their own personal histories. And so like Garrett Hedlund grew up on a farm, so he was able to bring that. Jonathan Banks, was able to like relate that man to people in his family. And so people, I think, brought their own personal histories to it, which I think is more interesting because I think the more personal you get, the more specific you get, then like this is generally the time. So I don't give people like a reading list necessarily because I feel like that's like an academic way into it. I'm trying to find a feeling way into it where people can bring their own personal histories to the story. And like, Rachel brought these amazing WPA photos. So like just the faces, just these faces on the wall, and all that kind of stuff like I get into. I don't know, but maybe you have. No? You good?
You're there, take it
You good?
over.
Okay. Yeah.
It was such a profound experience of tenderness and love as a thread throughout such violence and tragedy, and in everything from the script to the performances to the music to the editing. How can you maintain that tenderness and love throughout all of that tragedy and violence?
How do you maintain the tenderness and love through all that tragedy and violence?
Well, I just look at these characters are people. So like we're capable of all these things. We can hold two ideas in our head. We can be capable of tenderness, we can be capable of violence. Like Pappy can lynch a man and lay a blanket over his son. It's just keeping those details in the frame. It's like Pappy can be a grandfather to his granddaughters and then yell up and smack the shit out of Jamie. So it's just like as a director, it's just like just realizing we're complicated and we can hold two ideas at once. And Henry, can be like a loving guy, but he's also a racist. He's not gonna call names, but he's also going to say, hey, get up on your broken leg and come get this field done. So I just try to be honest, like with behaviors, and like it's just who we are. So I mean, I think it's layered. It's the how they're photographed. It's like, because the photography contains the tenderness and love. It's the music, it's the editing. So I think that's where all the crafts come in. So it's not just me. It's like it's a village of artists, and it's all the layers that give it that complication. So
perhaps maybe from the
Does anybody have a
from the
question for
composition
anybody else? Yeah.
perspective, say to Markali, if you're looking at the tenderness and love in this very adverse situation, how do you relate to that as a composer?
Very similar to what Dee is talking about, how we can hold more than one idea in our heads, and also just specifically around through the threat of violence. as a woman of color and as a descendant of people who were brought to this country in chattel slavery. My mother grew up in the Jim Crow South. So part of what keeps us alive is the tenderness of love amidst the violence, amidst the oppression. So it's kind of always there. It's the thing that you go to that heals and nurtures you before you have to go back out and get at it again. So I think it's one of those things that's just kind of present, and it's part of your reality on an everyday basis.
Okay. Would anyone else like to speak to it from the perspective of perhaps editing or cinematography or makeup?
As an editor, I'm very privileged to see all the dailies very first and just react viscerally to the performance, the raw performance. And as an editor, I always that first impression is very important. What comes to me as truth, authenticity. And what really struck me watching the daily first was the relationship between Wanzel and Hap. The two actors, they're almost like off-screen, on-screen connection they both had. And I think, Dee, you can talk to, I heard a little bit from Rob, but they really cared the history that they're bringing alive on set. And they really connected, and it just oozed from the screen. Their connection, the emotional tie, the father-son, they're in this together. They're fighting this together. They're acting out the fight together. And that, to me, I just needed to preserve that throughout the whole weeks and month of editing. And so I think there's love there. There's love and care of telling the story, telling the history.
Yeah, and so as the editor, Mako, she hears all the outtakes, she hears all the asides. Like there's a moment, like when we shot the barn scene, like, we brought Jason down and he just burst into tears, and like Rob just held him and they just cried together and like held each other, for a good like 10 minutes, and just needed to be that. They needed to release, and just the fact that Jason felt like Rob could, be there for him in that way, and we all just like were quiet and respected the moment, So it's just kind of like being patient, I think, and like having like a patient lens, like where, when Carrie, like the scene where she's like, just had the miscarriage, just like waiting for it, it's like not cutting, and then in the edit, it's like waiting for it, holding that shot, even though like, contemporary filmmaking is about, okay, 30 seconds and cut, it's like holding, and, but in order to have it in the edit, we had to hold, the role like on set, so it's just about like being patient, and I think just kind of like letting things develop and bloom, and like not stopping something if something goes wrong, like I usually let the take play out, even if like a C-stand falls through the frame, keep shooting because something else may come, and like it lets the actors feel safe and, have that kind of, be willing to reveal themselves.
We have time for one last question.
And I'd like to know if there was any part in the film that was emotionally difficult for you.
Is there any part in the film that was emotionally difficult for you? Is there any part that wasn't?
I know, yeah. A lot of it, but no, I think it's like, honestly, just like kids in peril, like that stuff is like on edge, even though it's not real. Like, the scene when Vera comes in, she's got the knife, and like the knife is in the frame and the kids are in the back, and then she lets out this feral scream, and even though the scream is coming, it still like, runs up and down my spine. I think all of it was, and just like the things between, in terms of even like the moments that were difficult were not necessarily moments where things, scary were happening, like the moments like happened Florence, like slow dancing, like how do you find that intimacy? Like, how do you, know that Hap thinks like, oh, we're gonna get back to where we were, and no, you're never gonna get back to where you were. That he's in a dream. So to me, sometimes it's those tender moments that are difficult, or even the moment where like Ronzel's giving his mother this chocolate bar. It's like this small like luxury, and knowing that she's not gonna eat it all. Just seeing that tenderness, and like, it's like things for me that like get me, and like it's like smaller things. It's like not the moments like that you think necessarily. It's all the moments in between where people are bearing themselves, and you just don't know how it's going to go. So.
Dee, thank you so much, and thank you to all of you for your extraordinary work.
Thank you guys for watching. Thank you.